throwing in little ideas about how to travel with watercolor. And I take a little Altoids box. I have actually a little bit bigger one, and hot glue. Oh my goodness, can't live without duct tape. And duct tape and hot glue are part of my existence. On my grave, I'm going to have hot glue. That's my sister. And it's like it's hot, and it's a little gun, and you put a little dot of it, and it holds everything together.
What makes it hot?
It's a hot gun.
What do you mean?
It's like it heats up. You put this long tube of glue in there, it heats up, and then you put a little dot of glue, and it holds everything.
It heats up by itself?
No, you have to plug it in. I'll get you one for your birthday. So that is one form of a travel kit you can put in there, or a bit larger one. Hi. Here for watercolor? See. I'm Wendy.
Where do you get those?
That's an Altoid box. Okay, so this is the cap to a tube of paint. And there's always a little bit, you can't quite get at it, so you can use it. This is enough, this little one that I didn't fill up is enough paint for 5 or 6 paintings. Watercolor really, you don't need that much paint, especially if you're using very high quality paint, which I recommend. So this amount of paint is actually enough to paint this whole painting, which I'm going to do, and 10 more. So that's like 10 large paintings out of this a little amount. So you really don't need very much. And this kit, I'll actually use this one. And then we can also use a little pill box like that for travel. And you can carry, I've gone out into the woods and carried it, you can get a little stool that folds up. They also have, I used to have, it's sort of a bag that you carry over your shoulder, and then it turns into a stool, so all your supplies could go in there. So that's one way to travel around with it. Now, I just heard that styrofoam was outlawed, right, in California the other day. Good thing I bought a bunch of these plates because they're so handy. I have to use this. They're the only thing that really works. This is what you're going to use today if you stay for a little lesson. So I'm going to talk about painting, and then we're going to, whenever we're ready, we'll go over to that table and we'll give you a little private lesson to get you started if you like. Okay, so I'll talk briefly about supplies, because with watercolor, the supplies are very important. You got to get the right thing. There's many things that are sold in the Blick store that are not really appropriate for watercolor that say watercolor on them. For example, the paper that says, like the pads say watercolor paper, a lot of people will buy that, but it's really not good paper for watercolor. You have to have 100% cotton paper. So you go over to the shelf and get that, or you can find certain brands that are 100% cotton. Why is that so important? Because the absorbency is the key issue with the surface. When you're doing other kinds of paint, you can just glob it on top and put something on top. It doesn't get absorbed into the surface. But with this, you're trying to interact with the soft paper, and the water goes in there and it pulls the paint in there and makes all the cool effects that you're familiar with watercolor. Or you, like this, like the glow. I think the cool thing about watercolor is the glow. Hello. This is your mom?
Yes.
Okay. And Wendy, what's your name? Hey, hi, I'm Wendy. And that's my sister, Cindy, over there. So you want to have 100% cotton paper. Now, all this information is on my website, so you can look at it later. But I think it's very important because I think a lot of people get the wrong kind of paper and the wrong kind of paint, and then they try it and they find out they don't really like watercolor because it really wasn't watercolor. It really wasn't the right materials. So you start out with 100% cotton paper, and the paint. Now we'll go. It's a little more complicated. I happen to use a certain brand of brush called Pro Art, Proline, made in England, which you can find through a link on my website. And you want to have a brush that is a very good point, so that you can use it that way. Very absorbent and very resilient, so it pops right back up. And this is a synthetic fiber. You don't need to buy anything like a very expensive sable brush anymore because the fibers they make now are so much better. So that's the kind of brush I use, and everything is, the details are on the website if you're interested. Now the paint is more complex, and that gets into my way of teaching, which is I would like you to learn color theory and how to mix all 7 million colors yourself. You don't go and buy a whole bunch of colors. Because to be an artist is to see color and then reproduce that. See lines, see shapes, see edges, and reproduce that. It's your eyes that are important in making you an artist. That's why the techniques you can learn, anybody can learn. Somebody that came in here said whether they were an artist or not, but everybody is an artist. It's just developing that ability to see the world in your particular unique way, because only you are going to see the world the way you do. All right, so I'm going to sort of go over the 4 paper techniques, the 3 brush techniques, the 3 ways of mixing color, and specifically about color. Oh, I should introduce who I am. I'm Wendy Sonneson. I'm here, just recently moved about a year ago from Boston, where I taught watercolor for 45 years. I taught at the Museum of Fine Arts and many other places. And now I'm here and I'm teaching a few classes that are local. But I am a watercolor teacher, and that's my main medium. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the colors. You see that I have 6 colors there. When I say I teach only from primary colors and you make all your own colors, that's what I mean. But the problem is there's no such thing as red paint. It doesn't exist. Yellow paint doesn't exist and blue paint does not exist. You're shaking your head, you already knew that. Okay, they haven't been able to perfect the color so that it comes one color without a little bit of other colors in them. They don't know how to make the pigments that way yet. Maybe they will someday. So every primary color, we'll call them primary colors, even though they have a tint of another color in them. Many other colors have all 3, red, yellow, and blue, and I discourage you from buying those because they're not good for mixing. Once you get 3 primary colors together, it's going to be muddy to some degree. So they're not good for mixing. You want to try to have a pigment with only 2 primary colors in it, because 1 doesn't exist. You have to have 2. So we have the red, yellow, and blue, each one of them tinted with one of the other primary colors. You'll see it better when I'm working up here. So there's a red with a little bit of yellow and a red with a little bit of blue. I'm not naming the colors because they're called different things with different companies. It's better to sort of identify them, and when you get your little palette later, if you stay for the class, it'll be like red with a little yellow, yellow with a little red, these letters, YB, yellow with a little blue, and so on. So you've got your red with a little blue and red with a little yellow. You've got your yellow with a little blue and your yellow with a little red, and so forth, and a blue and a blue. Each one of them has different amounts of that second primary, which you'll get used to. But with these 6 colors, you can make every color that is possible. And it's really better to make your own colors, because then you start to become color sensitive. You don't think a tree is all one color of green. You notice that it's got hundreds of colors, including not just green, but bright and dull greens. I'm looking at a tree now. Yellow, red, black, all kinds of colors that you see in the paintings in the museum, like, oh, that's great color, Cezanne. And that's because he could see those colors, and then he can put them in. You don't see them, you say, well, trees are green, I'm done. You're not going to be able to see the world that way. All right, so now we'll kind of switch into tints, and I'll go back and forth talking about colors and pigments as well. Please raise your hand if you have a question. Yes?
White and black, please.
We don't use white and black in watercolor. So watercolor, the paper is your white, and the reason for that is that's where you get the glow and the translucence of watercolor. So it's the paper is your white, and that's why it glows more than using other media. The black, you could buy black, but again, looking at color, there are hundreds of blacks. You've ever been into Home Depot and you see the charts and there's 25 blacks to choose from? Why?
Because it's a mix.
Because there's so many different blacks. Some are, here's a black, here's a black. They are not the same color. One of them is a little more blue, one of them has a little more brown in it. So any tertiary color or a mixed color has red, yellow, and blue in it, and so black has a lot of red, a lot of yellow, a lot of blue in it. So we make our own blacks. First, you see the black. So if I'm doing your shirt as opposed to her shirt, I have a different mix, a little more blue in your black, so that we can understand there are many, many blacks, many, many greens, and so on. And you'll be able to make them. Maybe even today in the class, you'll be able to make any color that you choose by choosing the right combination. So each one of these has one primary and then a little bit of the other. All right, so as far as technique, now this has already been painted, and I have soaked this paper after I painted it, so none of this is going to come off. Why? Because it has been absorbed into the paper, so it's married to the paper. It doesn't come off. Now, if it did come off, that means you did improper technique, because The water's supposed to pull the paint into the paper, and that's how you keep it translucent. Now, if you're not going to paint translucent, you might as well be painting with oils or acrylics. It's a lot easier to paint with. So you have to kind of love watercolor. Do you love watercolor? Well, you're here, I guess, so you must like it a little bit. But it's that glow and translucency that we really want to keep. All right, so nothing is coming off here because all this paint is absorbed into the paper. So I'm going to do a sky here and talk about, yes.
Question. It's gum tragicamp, that's the binding medium for watercolor, is that correct? The actual
Gum Arabic.
Arabic, so can you talk a little bit about how that works with the pigments and the paper and the water?
Yeah, it comes from a tree in northern Africa. It's gum Arabic from
Right.
And it's really, it's in food even, gum Arabic, but it keeps the paint moist. So we want to buy the tube paint. Now, let me just briefly talk about the tubes. Because I get so many students, I've taught over 3,000 students, and sometimes they waste their money on the wrong products, and I hate to see that. They come in with all this paint that they're never going to be able to use, because they don't know what they're buying, and you know what, the manufacturers don't want you to know, because they want you to keep buying more stuff, right? So they'll have a paint that's called some other name, and then you'll buy a new color. So here's a tube, a large tube of paint. This is American Journey brand, but we don't pay too much attention to the names because they just make up names, just like lipstick or cars, you know. But this is a tube of paint. Now, what is in that tube of paint? This is artist grade. There's artist grade and student grade. You don't want the student grade because all they do is fill it up with extra stuff to make it cheaper. I'm a student. Doesn't matter. You want the best quality paint when you first start to paint. So you don't want to handicap yourself. So with artist grade paint, we've got a certain amount of pigment. Now, where does pigment come from? The color. Earth. It originally comes from the earth, and now, like cobalt is a color. It's a stone that they grind. They used to make their own paints. Now, all paint is not made from actual rocks and plants. It's a chemical equivalent where all the dirty stuff that doesn't help the paint very much is taken out. Each company has a different formula. This is American Journey. So they have maybe up to 20 different other ingredients that help it mix with other colors and do different things. So in the artist grade, you got a good amount of pigment in there, pretty good amount of gum Arabic, which is the cheap filler. You'd have a lot more if you were doing, you won't be able to see quite as well over there. You can sit there if you want, because I'm going to be standing in front of this. It's up to you. And then a little bit of water and other stuff that is filler. So you want to have pigment, you want to have a really good formula. So you have to use the artist grade paint. Don't buy the cheap paint. All right. So let's get painting now. All right, I'm going to start with the red. Let's start with the blue that has a little yellow in it. So this is going to be the technique called dry on wet. There's 4 techniques: wet on dry, wet on wet, dry on dry, and dry on wet. And that refers to the paint being wet or dry, or the paper being wet or dry. So different things happen when you have different ways of working with the wet or the dry. So this paper is slightly wet. I've soaked it in the sink. And the paint, we call it dry. It's not really dry. It just has very little water in it. So I'm going like this. I have this, it had sort of dried up, and now I'll just add a little bit of water or spray it, and I'm getting nice and thick. So this is, you can see the yellow in that color. I'm adding a little water. That is your, well, it's actually phthalo blue, which is the name of the color, the pigment. Phthalo blue has a little yellow in it. I'm going to sort of go through a rainbow effect. So we're going to go around the color wheel, and the next color is the blue, the yellow with a little blue, which is usually called lemon. So if I go like this, what we get is no red in that color because the 2 colors only have yellow and blue in them. So we're going to get a really bright green there, which I'm going to tone down a little bit with the 3rd primary. When you get 3 primaries, what happens to the color? I'm gonna say this over and over, because that's the thing that trips people up over and over. Why am I painting so muddy? Because you have 3 primaries. You can't get the 3rd primary out in watercolor, because you can't cover it up, it's translucent. So don't put the 3rd primary in there unless you want it to be muddy. Sometimes you do. Okay, so the 3rd primary makes the color dull or muddy, and you can't undo that. So this is a brightish green. All right, next color. I'll just briefly name the colors. This is cadmium yellow. Cadmium yellow has a little bit of red in it. There's your cadmium yellow. You can see you blend it with the other yellow. It turns slightly dull. Now I'm going to be moving into reds. So the cadmium yellow is your orangey yellow. And then this is the dry on wet method. And now that's what the cadmium yellow looks like. Now, we're going to move into the cadmium red, which is the red that has a little yellow in it. And now, there's 3 things you do with your brush with almost every operation. I've just done one of them, which is apply the water or the paint. The second one is blending. So now there's going to be nothing on my brush. But I'm just gonna, it's dry, semi-dry, and I'm just gonna blend. So that's operation number 2 that you can do with your brush. You can do that for a while. So you get the effect. So you spend a lot of time on step 2, which is blending your colors. Step 3 is, what do you think step 3 is gonna be? The third thing you can do with your brush is, you know, remove. So I get too much on here, so it's called lifting. 1, 2, and I counsel my students to do 30 cleanup strokes with a clean brush, and that's about all you can get off. So that's called lifting. I'm going to move into the next color. Put a little water there. And this is, well, the pigment is called quinacridone red, but it's called different things. So this is your red with a little blue in it. So far, I'm trying not to mix any 3 primaries together. That's why the colors are very bright, but I'll go back and I'm going to mix some other 3rd primaries in there. Okay, that is quinacridone red, which has a little blue in it. Now we'll go into ultramarine. So that we get a bright purple because there's only 2 primaries, that's red and blue. Now we're going to go back to, the color wheel is a circle, we're going to go back to the color I started with. And I'm going to lighten it just with some water. Now what I wanted to do, my plan was to get that sun over there, so I'm going to switch to this color. Orange, a little bit of orange. Remove a little of that. Okay, so now if I want to dull a color up here, for example,
So I've got this bright green. So all I need to do is add the third primary to make this dark. Now I'll just, that means I'm gonna add red. Either red. I'm adding the quinacridone red to make these dark clouds. Or you can add cadmium or the quinacridone, either one. So now we're working towards that black color. In any painting, you want to have a balance of bright colors and dull colors. So you start with, if you start with the bright colors, then you can dull some of them.
So are you dulling it with the color that's on the opposite side of the color wheel from how you dull it?
Well, you've already got two primaries. All you need to figure out is the third primary. But if you want to go directly, yeah, you can go, if it's red, orange, then you can go, the opposite would be, what's the opposite of orange is blue. Opposite of red is green. So it's a greenish blue, so you can use that too. But you're not going to have a color that's exactly that color. So you just think of the third primary. So
Okay.
adding red.